Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santy, joined today by Richard Cohen.
Hello.
Hooray, hooray. We haven't done just a one-on-one recording in a long time, it doesn't seem like.
I don't know. I can't keep track anymore.
Yeah, okay.
I feel like we did one recently. I don't know.
Okay,
Anyway,
my brain is not what it was.
I'm not sure it was that back then either. But
Yesterday in the class I was teaching, I completely blanked on something and made the student that I was responding to say her whole thing again so I could get it. And I said, I guess I can't blame the chemo anymore. I guess This is just my brain.
Right.
But at
yeah,
any rate,
I always say, you all don't laugh at me. You'll experience this when you're my age.
Yeah. Oi. Okay. So Richard and I are here to talk about.
Oh, right. We're being recorded.
We're recording things and other people are listening to us right now. So
forgot. Go ahead.
So we're going to do another episode about teaching college students. I think that we've done a few of these and the conversation generally ends up being sort of relevant to anyone who's, listening probably, but we are both community college instructors, and I'm learning a lot, and Richard's been doing it a long time. So we often have things that we feel like other people might be interested in hearing us talk about, or just that we want to talk to each other about. So this is one of those. And so it's going to start with a Bell Hooks quote from the book, Teaching Critical Thinking. When she passed, I was really surprised how many people commented, because her quotes were everywhere on Facebook for that week or two. And how many people that I know would comment, "Oh, I've never heard of her before. I love this quote. I'm going to have to check her out more." And I was surprised by that. So if you
I was surprised I just figured nobody knew her. And so the outpouring of love, like I was surprised by the opposite. Wow, she's known by more than just me.
Yeah. Oh, that is strange that we had such different reactions, responses with that. But at any rate, she's wonderful and you should read her, even if you're not a teacher. This one, though, is specifically about, as it says, teaching critical thinking. And our quote to start our conversation is, "Engaged pedagogy produces self-directed learners, teachers, and students who are able to participate fully in the production of ideas. As teachers, our role is to take our students on the adventure of critical thinking." Yes, I agree. Good work, Bell Hooks.
Absolutely.
So let's start. Well, this episode's really stemming from an idea you sent me. So do you want to start and just kind of talk about what you hope this conversation is, or why you wanted to do this critical thinking focus?
Sure. What I'll say is, as you were reading her quote, and what came up for me was, of course, yes, that's exactly what I want for my students, just like I want for my 3-year-olds. Critical thinking, you go, girl. Yes, that's what I want.
Yeah.
But then as you were reading it, I was thinking, wow, when I interviewed for this particular community college teaching job, and I took it on, and I inherited my syllabi and my course objectives, I was thinking, wow, what Bell Hooks just wrote is so different than, well, basically anyone who's not a critical thinker, who just inherits these documents and says, that's my job. They don't even consider critical thinking, because the jobs and the systems and the accreditation processes rarely hit on that. You and I have often railed about standardization in early childhood.
Yep.
And now, as we're both teaching higher ed, you and I have also railed about standardization at the higher ed level.
Yes, absolutely.
And so what Bell Hooks wrote just in that one quote is so revolutionary and countercultural, because the culture continues to push standardization. And so that got me thinking the other day, which is when I reached out to you. Now I've just lost my train of thought.
We can wait.
Yeah, could everyone listening just wait silently for a minute? So the goal, I was thinking the goal of what I'm told is my job
Uh-huh.
is that I'm responsible for making sure that every student who comes through our early childhood education program leaves it with an associate's degree, and that degree means the same thing for every student, so that any employer out there, oh, they have an associate's degree from Manchester Community College.
Mhm.
Okay, that's a good school. I think that means I could hire this person because
Yeah.
that degree means X.
Mhm.
But if you value what Bell Hooks wrote about in that quote, um, it changes your whole way of, it changes what you expect and you wish for your students. That's, I don't know if I'm rambling here, but uniquely different
Yeah.
than that standardized goal.
Mhm.
That piece of paper means the same thing for everyone. If your goal is critical thinking, and you have to take each student developmentally wherever they're at and scaffold them to further critical thinking, there's just no way you can guarantee that your diploma means the same thing for every student.
Right. I was thinking about it this week when I was teaching, because I'm teaching a curriculum class. It's 100 level, very early kind of class. And I have to say, in case any of them are listening, but also I would say this anyway, I am loving this class. 8 o'clock in the morning, and they are such good participants and discussers, like they're ready. And the class ends next week, and I'm not ready for it to end. So I have two people there's 9 people in the class, but there's 2 who have a lot of experience and are already working in the field and coming back to get their degree. And they're being presented with the same information, but they come away when we're discussing with totally different interpretations of it. And so that I thought about that in the context of the texting we had done about this episode, and what your starting idea was, it's a standard in that they are reading the same thing, they're part of the same discussion, and they have the same instructor. That's standardized, but the ideas that they're taking out of it is not. And it just was sort of a reminder to me that you just can't say, oh, I've got this degree, so now I am fully qualified and have everything I need to do the work. And so it just seems like, so futile to put all this work into, my accreditation process right now. Hope my peer reviewers aren't listening, because they're coming in a couple of weeks.
Oh God. So just take a moment. Let's just take a moment and tell people what you're talking about. When you say my accreditation, tell them the monster that you've been moving through.
Yeah. So I'm program chair at a community college, and only full-time faculty. It's a very small program. And I started in June, and that means I came in just at the time that we have to renew our institutional accreditation with NACE, the same group that does most of the childcare program accreditations, also does this for colleges. And the goal is to make sure that so NACE has identified professional development or professional preparation standards, things that everybody needs to be able to do to go out and do the work with young children. And they are essentially now reviewing my program to see if I can prove to them that these are in fact the things that our students are learning.
Yes.
And so we have things like key assessments. We have 5 assignments that each assignment includes intentionally, 2 or 3 of those standards. And so now we even go further and we say, when the students have done these 5 assignments, that demonstrates that they can do all 20, 24, whatever of these standards we think every early childhood professional needs to be able to do. So we submitted paperwork to prove that in the fall, and now they're coming to visit our site in a couple of weeks to look around campus and meet with students and meet with my adjuncts and support programs around administrators on campus, and then they'll determine whether we are in fact putting out a good product with
Right.
our graduates.
Right. And if anyone out there has ever gone through, like as a center director, for example, and has gone through the NAEYC accreditation for early childhood programs, what a nightmarish set of hoops you have to jump through, how time consuming and burdensome it is for you and your entire staff. And then at the end of it, you get your sticker saying, yes, we're accredited.
Yeah.
And if anyone out there is listening also may know, and I know you don't hear this said out loud because people get in trouble when they say it, but
You say it then. Okay.
It doesn't mean anything.
Oh.
You and I know so many NAEYC accredited early childhood programs that make us cringe.
Yeah.
Because they are not doing what's best
Right.
for young children.
Or cry. I've cried in many accredited programs because of what I see happening with children. Yep.
It hurts our hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then you look at consumers out there, parents, and they see that seal of approval, just like our diploma. It's supposed to mean we've assessed this institution, and yes, it meets our highest standards. But it doesn't always.
Yeah.
And the same is true with, in addition to everything we have to do our jobs. We jump through all these hoops in order to prove these things, in addition to everything else we have to do for our jobs. And at the end of the day, it doesn't actually mean anything.
Yeah.
And it's just infuriates me.
Yeah. And if I'm honest, I can acknowledge to some extent that it comes from a place of good intention.
Absolutely.
Right.
But in the process of standardizing it so that everyone theoretically meets the same line, it loses its power. It takes the sort of the art and the human component, which is vital to our profession, both higher ed and early childhood programmatic, and all that gets lost.
Yeah. And even
the goal of data, standardized data.
Right.
And that when you create your system with that being your goal, the biggest value of our field, the magic of human connection, can't get measured and becomes devalued.
Yeah. And I even, I like the professional preparation standards. I do think that those are things that would be really valuable for people working with children to have, but I don't think that the ways we try to measure it or teach it are effective at creating that standardized, reliable end product, because we are humans and because there are so many unmeasurable factors. And I think that's where, we can't measure critical thinking, but I can measure whether someone got a good grade on a key assessment that we say connects to the standards. That's measurable. So, that's why we do it. That's why we jump through the hoops.
Right.
But we have to be, so for the people in those processes, the instructors, the students, the program chairs, whoever, whatever you call it, your department head, all have to have an understanding that it's not only that, and there's so much more that can be gone in. Like there are conversations too now with the folks that I work with about maybe all our classes should be standardized, and we all have a course outline with the goals that we hope to meet during the course. And my view is that I look at those goals and I figure out, okay, how can we do that in a real way, and in a way that, what did she say? Students are able to participate fully in the production of ideas along with me, and sort of provide space for critical thinking. But another instructor might say, well, that means we all have to have the same assignments, and we all have to have go in the same order of goals, rubrics. Yeah. And it's difficult because I just don't feel like that's meaningful work as looking at the process rather than the product.
Bingo. And here's how that shows up in my little world. So like you, I work in a very large institution that, so I'm not knocking my community college because I've worked at many and they're all the same.
Right.
And every large business in this country is the same. It's not.
Yeah. I'll say
even
that
about
too. None of my stuff is about a specific place. It's about the process we've all accepted, the system we've all accepted, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm one of the front-facing representatives of my massive statewide organization, which going in that there's going to be bureaucracy, there's going to be toxicity, there's going to be hierarchy and a lack of understanding about what we at the bottom who are right there with the students do. That's the nature of our systems. So it's not unique to my college. So because I value critical thinking, I run my classes in a way where I allow students to interact with a text or a video or a lecture or participate in a project, and then they reflect on it. And as you were saying, they each come away with what's meaningful to them. And by doing that, they get a good grade. So the people I report to, my deans and the people above them, are able to look and say, oh, Richard's students are getting the right percentage of A's, B's, failures, and that must mean the program's good. And they don't know that those A's and B's they don't know that those A's and B's, what they represent, right? They're overburdened at their level in the system. And so they just look at all their professors and say, oh, that A in biology must mean the same thing as that A in early childhood education. And that A in biology means they memorized all the required facts and were able to repeat them when they're tested. And that's an A. But for me, that A means so many different things. If you get a degree in biology, it pretty much means you know the same as someone else with that same degree.
Right.
Because it was all about quantitative testing. But in our world, it's like a game I have to play. Like, yes, I'll do it. And yes, you can rest easy that my grades are where they are. So you can tell that to your supervisors and onward up to the state level. But I have to not talk about it because what I know in running my early childhood program is it's uniquely different from many of the other departments at the college. And we just have to sort of play that game.
Yeah.
But so the other thing that led me to reaching out to you the other day about this topic was this very conversation that we were having. I started realizing, I started reflecting on all of my course objectives in all of our early childhood program courses. And, so there's just a million early childhood course objectives that people need to know in order to get that degree, right? Facilitating art, facilitating math, science, language and literacy, understanding child development, working with parents, behavioral guidance, all those things, right? And every one of those has a subset of course objectives. And my goal is to cover each of those objectives by the end of each semester so that by the end of the degree, they've covered all those topics. They're quote unquote, fully knowledgeable to step into the role of a teacher, right? And so I started thinking, when I was a young teacher in the 80s, I'm really glad I had all that and that my college education was structured in that way. Makes sense to me. But then I started thinking, okay, but now we live in 2022 and the entire world, the context in which this education takes place is completely different than where we started. And now I'm not sure, this was the idea I said to you the other day. I'm not sure that our goal should be making sure that our students have all of these 82 objectives covered in their minds and that their minds are full. It seems to me the young people that I work with are all, for better or for worse, tied to their phones, tied to the internet, and anything they need is at their fingertips. And they're used to living in a world where if I need to know something, I can just look it up and have that information in a minute. So I started thinking, well, why is my goal to give them all that information? Why is that the end goal, to fill their minds? Maybe my goal is to make sure they know all the resources that are out there, who are the trusted sources, how to find the information they need. You know, like when I was a young teacher, first day of school, the parent came to me and said, my student has night terrors. Isn't that what it's called?
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, so I had to go to a library and look that up and get my mind around it and figure out how to support them. I don't need to have any student graduate knowing night terrors and what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
I need them to know where to look, how to find it, how to analyze what they found.
That's
so
what I
that
was.
they know it's valid, and then
Yeah.
communicate it to the parents.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if our goal should even be filling complete information or just giving them the resources they need and helping them use their critical skills
Mm-hmm.
to know when and how to find those resources.
Yeah. And I think that analyzing piece is the piece that we don't give them enough tools for. And that's, that's right in line with critical thinking, because analysis is part of that. But, we do have endless information at our fingertips, but some of it is crap. I think there's a place in this conversation for us introducing some of that knowledge and then playing with it, practicing with it, comparing it to our own experiences and our own opinions and the center we observed in last week or whatever. Like, behavior management is an example, and I don't like that phrase, but that's what we call it.
Got it.
In our court. Yeah, that's what most people would call it. Yep. So they Google something, a specific behavior or something. I don't necessarily wanting them just going with the most popular result that tops the Google list. Right. I want them to be able to look at that and say, okay, well, I remember when we talked about biting in ECED 130 or whatever, even if they don't remember the number. And how does this kind of line up with what I heard in that discussion? And so I think that we do have to present information, but our final goal shouldn't just be cramming that in and saying goodbye, like just presenting it, hoping they can regurgitate it for a grade. And then that's the end. You've got your paper.
Right. I mean, especially in 2022, it doesn't make sense. I feel like our big goal in higher education needs to be, rethought, relooked at.
Mm-hmm.
As I think back to when I was a young teacher in the 80s and 90s, this is just the kind of student I am. I was teaching at the time. So that transformed it all, because it wasn't all just abstract in a job I was going to do in the future.
Right.
I was applying it to my job right there every day. And so every handout, every thing in a textbook, every whatever I could find, I started creating these massive file folders in a filing cabinet in every classroom I had for years. And so if there was a biting issue, I had articles on biting.
Same.
If there was a, right?
Yep.
Are you like me? Like you had all those?
I am, yes.
That's like our dinosaur version of the internet.
Yeah.
And so, because I didn't have all that information in my head, I just knew to store it and arrange it so I could get to it quickly and say, oh, parent, you're struggling with potty training. I've got great stuff on it. Hang on, here it is. And now in 2022, whether I'm talking to a parent or a student, whatever, we go back to the internet. So doesn't it make sense? But because you're right, there's a tremendous amount of crap and false information and scary stuff out there. Doesn't it make more sense for you and I to be spending our time helping our students understand who are the trusted sources, how to tell if a source is trusted? Because the truth of their future is they don't need to have all that in their heads. They're going to go look it up on the internet. And what I want them to know is which things should they look at and for on the internet. That feels like a better goal. And then it becomes
in their head, then it's in their head. Eventually, right? So they've had to go do their research and analyze it and connect it to a real life situation. It's more likely that they're going to remember it than if I made them read a chapter, take a quiz, and write a paper about the same topic before it's relevant to them.
Right. And doesn't it make sense that my goal over the next 2 years is to give you an encyclopedia of information to store in your head? Versus, which is our higher ed goal, versus you're going to encounter these things at different points in your career, these different moments, these different challenges. Isn't it better to just help them understand where to go when those challenges arise versus trying to fill it all up in their minds proactively.
Yeah. And if that's our personal approach, we're more likely to teach children in that way too, like to see that we don't have to have all the answers. We're not the only ones providing, it's not all about just data input with young children. It's, sometimes you don't know, and you model how to be curious about it and where to explore and what to do in response.
My courses are very purposefully experiential because I have a great background in being a student of experiential learning, and I've just embraced it now in my own teaching. And so, for example, in my language and literacy class, we're talking about how students interpret words on a page as a beginning reader, right? So when they walk in, there's a sentence written in code on the whiteboard, and I say, "Okay, you all read what's up there." We don't know. Well, okay, you're gonna have to figure that out. And they go through the process of figuring it out and decoding it. And I didn't spend time lecturing on the theory of writing development. I gave them, and I say to them very purposefully, this exercise was about empathy. So the next time you're with young children, you'll remember how it feels to see squiggles on a page that you don't understand. And your job is to support them and facilitate them through that process, like I've just been doing for you.
That's great.
I'd rather have them spend that time than having me lecture about the stages of writing development. Now they get that, but it's not my goal that they memorize that.
Right. Well, I would say the students probably enjoy that better than sitting through a lecture from you or watching another PowerPoint from another professor who's just trying to cram every possible thing in so that we can kind of feel like, well, they have no excuse for not knowing it because it was all in that PowerPoint. It was all in my lecture.
And you know what word you just said that was so meaningful to me? Enjoy.
Yeah.
Because it occurred to me that you and I have so many conversations as it relates to early childhood programs about play and how the rest of the world puts that word just in front of it. Well, it's just play. That can't be valuable. And in higher ed, if my dean were to hear you say what you just said, she'd be like, our goal is not enjoyment. We're not here to entertain them. But what you and I know is that enjoyment is code for the side of their brain that handles affect. And that when that side of a brain of a 2-year-old or a 22-year-old is activated along with the other side that's there to take in information, retain it, comprehend it, it's more likely to become meaningful and useful and replicable later. So that enjoyment piece isn't just a simple warm and fuzzy. From a neurological standpoint, enjoyment is critically important to learning.
Really, just, any emotion, if we can engage an emotional response at the same time that we're playing with a new idea or introducing a new idea or reflecting on something we've already talked about, it's more likely for a connection to be formed, like a meaningful, lasting connection to be formed. And so that, like I've had to think about that because I don't want any conflict when my students are discussing, or I don't want a student to feel like I'm saying everything you do is wrong, blah, blah, blah. But then I have to remind myself that's how it works. Sometimes it's a little bit of anger or a little bit of even grief about a practice you're really attached to being challenged, and that has that same potential for connection as if they're feeling really happy and enjoying what we're all discussing.
Yep. And I also think as it relates to conflict, I don't seek it out, but I definitely create situations that I know it's quite possible that conflicts will arise. And I do that, and I tell my students that I do that because when they get out there in the real world, they're going to encounter conflicts. And I'd rather give you practice navigating a conflict here in a safe space with me helping facilitate, so that you have some experience of it before you get out there in the world, and you will absolutely encounter conflicts. Let's practice it here.
So Belle has a quote for that too.
Let's hear it.
Critical thinking book. She has a whole chapter on conflict. I just read this one last night in the tub, so it's fresh in my mind. But she said, instead of focusing on the commonly held assumption that we're safe when everyone agrees, when everyone has equal time to speak, if we rather think of safety as knowing how to cope in situations of risk, then we open up the possibility that we can be safe even in situations where there's disagreement.
Yep.
So, I think a lot, and we've talked about emotional safety and students needing to feel safe, to be able to really engage in learning. And it was pushing me too far to well, then I need to avoid conflict, instead of, this perspective that, well, this is a safe place to practice being in conflict and
That's
moving through conflict, which is going to be much more useful in the real world, even in their job with children, than this idea that we should all just always agree and be pleasant and
Right.
wherever that takes
Because if
us.
that's your goal, you get those early childhood preschool teachers who are, hello, my friends. How are you, my friends? We're all
Yes.
friends.
Yeah.
You don't treat your friends like that.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, you made your friend unhappy.
Right. My job is to make sure the children are all happy.
Yeah.
And that comes from a really good place. Let's just remind, and I love the people who do that, but it's also, it's misguided in understanding what young children really need, which is, I've been on the planet 1,000 days and I'm just trying to make sense of this world. And this world isn't just all happy. So help me figure it out.
Yeah. Or what's wrong with me if I don't feel as happy as you always present yourself?
Right. And what I don't understand why you keep saying they're my friend and I hate them.
Right. I don't ever want to play with
that out. But going back to that second bell hooks quote, what came up for me as you were reading it, one word in particular stood out. You said toward the end that the goal was knowing how to cope with coming challenges or events, right? So what popped up for me as a higher ed professional is that word knowing. So if my goal is to make sure that they know the 8 steps to diaper changing, all right, so knowing uses this side of their brain for memorization, and I kind of do need to test them on that to make sure they remember the steps in the right order. I'll probably make it experiential with a doll and we'll do it. But if my goal is knowing how to cope with future conflicts, that knowing isn't about memorizing. It's about learning that I'm competent and capable and I can trust my judgment in a moment like that.
Yeah.
I know how to calm myself down and think clearly. Like that's what knowing looks like in that really abstract goal.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
And that's our job as higher ed pros, is knowing, is knowledge.
Right.
But we can't just have it show up as standardized information that people are tested on.
Yeah.
It doesn't work out there then in the world.
Yeah. Or that piece of paper is proof of professionalism. I mean, I know that's why there's such a push lately, and I'm a teacher. I'm all for people getting experience and exposure to, experts and thinking about skills you need and whatever. But it's my turn to forget where I was going. Oh, professionalism. Yeah. In my mind, I would much prefer, and maybe it's just because I did this backwards and worked a long time before I went to college for any of this. Professionalism is about being thoughtful about what you're doing and being really intentional about connecting expertise, practice, skill that we heard or learned about into the real world, and really doing those things with children and having all of our decisions informed as much as possible by that knowledge and that expertise, and not just saying, well, I was able to jump through all the hoops to get this piece of paper, therefore I am professional, but my practice is going to be, I'm going to go in and try and create my 3rd grade classroom for this group of 2-year-olds.
Right.
And recreate the environment as I remember my 3rd grade class being.
Yes.
Which is what happens.
And I would add to I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said that's what happens a lot of times, I think.
Absolutely, it does. Yep.
Yeah.
And I would add, I think your definition of professionalism is spot on. And I would maybe add a sentence.
It could perhaps be more eloquent.
Oh, it was very
articulate.
eloquent. I liked that a lot. But I would just add that in our unique field, not for every field necessarily, but for our unique field, the other piece of professionalism has to be knowing how to express your unique version of humanity at your job, and knowing where your boundaries are, so that you can be a human being for children and families and your coworkers and your boss, but also knowing how to set boundaries around that as a professional. Like in our field, it won't work unless you also have that, I think.
Yeah. And so an example that comes to mind for me, and maybe this is what you're thinking or not, but so this came up yesterday when I recorded with Lisa, and comes again from a class I was teaching. But so something as simple as, like, I remember when I was first starting to work with children, and I was so excited about the lesson plan, and I know the process of lesson planning and spending my weekends doing all this stuff. I know now that was more about my personality, liking notebooks and liking office supplies and liking, at that time, to color. And I loved the little lesson plan notebook I bought at this teacher supply store. But now I know that those things don't translate into being an effective, good, responsive teacher of young children. So that even something as simple as that can be a boundary that establishes your professionalism. Like, I understand that this is my personality, that I love bulletin boards, but I also understand that there's reasons that we maybe don't need to have elaborate bulletin boards all over our classrooms. And that's sort of a really simple, sort of everyday example of how I think what I thought when you were talking about that
Perfect
extra
example.
Yeah.
Another more sort of provocative example is I'm able to know, self-knowing, right? I'm able to know that I was hurt very badly by a man when I was a child. And so I'm able to see that impacts the way I interact with dads in my classroom. And I'm able to notice that and figure out now how I need to address that personally. Like, that's part of being an effective professional in our particular field.
Yeah.
And you don't learn that in college.
Right.
That's not a course objective anywhere. And that's troublesome to me.
Right. Yeah. I would say we learned very little in college about real parent-family relationship building.
Right. Which reminds me of another related topic we've talked about before, which is, so we're charged with running an early childhood program. Is our job, and my boss would say to the two choices I'm about to give you, absolutely, your job is number one. Is our job number one to teach these students best practices so that they go out into the world knowing exactly what's best for young children? Or two, is it to prepare them for the real world and real preschools and childcare centers and programs out there that look nothing like best practices, and how to navigate that?
Can it be both?
Well, exactly. I think our job has to be both. And that's a really complex thing to do in our roles.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think
just do best practices.
Every class period before I say, and often multiple times during a conversation, I find myself filtering what I'm about to say through the reality that this is not what they've seen or are going to see when they go out. And what do I need to do about that? And it's exhausting some days.
So my way of doing that is, at the beginning of the semester, I ask, so who's currently working with groups of young children or has in the past? Raise your hand. And I write down all those names. So I know my subset that has that to speak to. So when we approach that topic and I say, this is what it should look like, this is what we consider best practice. Now, by the way, Alexandra, is that what it looks like in your center? What I just
call
described?
them right out. Okay.
Well, I tell them at the beginning of the semester, now I am going to call on you to speak about your real program. If you don't want to, you're always free to say no, but you're the perfect person to say what it really looks like out there in the world, because I haven't been out there in a long time. So I'll say, here's what's best. And now, hey, for those of you working with young children, is that what it looks like where you work? And they'll say, no, not at all. Okay, so how do you handle that? And to me, that's a valuable conversation.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. I agree with that. I want to start doing that.
It's awesome.
It's a really useful way of approaching it. Yeah.
I feel like this, I see the students, you see those light bulb moments that I used to see with 3-year-olds, and you see them connecting with each other. I think it's also a reminder. I think one of the big unspoken principles that I always try to communicate to my students is being a teacher can often be, being an early childhood teacher can often be really isolating.
Yeah.
And so learn how to network. You just heard this other teacher say something really wise. If I were you right now, I'm not telling you to do this, but I'd get her phone number and ask, can I call you if I have questions? And when I was a young teacher, one of the reasons I was successful was because I knew my mentors, I knew my resources, and anytime I was stumped, I called them.
Yeah.
And I'd rather have them learn that wisdom than the 8 steps of diaper changing.
Yep. Absolutely. I last fall started this, and then last fall got away from me, and I didn't do all of my things that I intended to do.
I wonder why.
But I had a group of not necessarily people in the class, that's but like my early childhood friends that I knew were in programs that are like what I'm talking about. And I had volunteers, and I was going to assign each of my students to one of those volunteers that they didn't have to do anything with them, but they could just reach out. It was really informal, but they'd have someone who, because they're always really interested. This was an intro class. They're always really interested in the nature preschools, but they have 700 reasons why it would never work.
Exactly. Yes.
Call Tiffany. She will talk to you forever about this.
What a gift you
navigated
doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it didn't get off the ground. I don't know that many of them took, but I'm going to try it again this summer when I do the intro class again. And
it's one of those things that may pay off long after they've left us.
Yeah. Yeah.
We may not see the results,
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like early childhood.
Yeah. But I feel like, to go back to the idea of critical thinking that has sort of been woven through all of this, giving them or helping them see those relationships as another way to process. There's what is it? Critical friends, finding critical friends, not friends who criticize you, but friends who will help you when you're talking about your idea. And this isn't really uncomfortable for me to be on the receiving end of a critical friendship, but who might say,
why was it uncomfortable?
Because I want to be perfect all the time.
And so I can relate to that. Okay.
So someone saying, "Ooh, but have you thought about this?" Or, or what I'm hearing is, maybe not, I don't know, just that anti-cheerleader, but in a kind way, like not just a friend who's going to be a yes man, but someone who will say, I don't know if that's, how I would do it, or I don't know if that's how it would really work out. Let's talk about it some more. Or have you thought about this element?
I'll tell you my version of that.
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was sort of realizing I wasn't going anywhere. So please,
I thought you were, but okay. I like to look perfect too. And I can be honest about that.
Right.
And so I think, looking back on myself as a young teacher, how that worked was, people were like, wow, Richard knows his stuff. He's got a lot of information in his head, and he seems to know. And there was a part of my ego that loved that. Right. But the way I got to that was by being willing to look like I don't know something in front of my mentors. So that I could come back to work and say, here's what I know. So anytime I had a challenge, and I was just so blessed. Anytime I had a challenge, I called Bev, boss.
Oh, wow.
Day or night.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say, I don't understand what is happening with this parent in my class, or I can't figure out what's going on with this kid. And she would say, well, what if you thought about it this way? What if you did this? And then I'd go back and do it. And then I'd get all the praise.
Yeah.
And look good. But it's because I was willing to not look good in front of Bev and be humble and vulnerable with her, and gain and be really open to, not so set on my self-righteous, I'm right about it when I'm with her privately.
I was very much invested in my self-righteousness in a lot of my career. And it was actually really isolating. And then it was, hard to find those relationships that would
Right.
feed me or challenge me, or I don't know.
And the truth is, it's just really human.
Yeah.
We think we're the only one, and so it becomes a deep, dark secret. But the
Yeah.
truth is, most everybody's going through the same thing. We
Yeah.
just don't talk about it.
Yep. Yeah. I have no idea how long we've been recording,
I
but
don't
it
either.
seems like maybe more than an hour.
Is this like a mini series? Well, I say let's do another hour then. Let's keep going.
Okay, well, I'm going to end this conversation, and if you want to, we can start recording another one as soon as, so I can release it as two, because I don't edit, as everyone knows. In fact, we've frozen several times in this conversation, and I have sort of paused and restarted. But I'm thinking now about the video. Like, I'm not going to go in and clip out all those weird spots where I paused and waited for it to unfreeze. So.
If you edited out every time we paused, this podcast would be down to like 5 minutes.
Right, that's true. So maybe we've been talking for 5 minutes and we've been frozen for an hour. Okay, no, this was great, and I really feel like we could keep going, but I'm not sure people are going to keep listening, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. I felt really jazzed by this conversation.
Yeah,
great.
Yay. Okay.
And let me just say to the people out there, find someone to have a conversation like this with, because this is what rejuvenates me.
Yeah.
Keeps me going and keeps me learning and expanding my knowledge by just having a conversation like this with someone like Heather. So go have that experience for yourself, because it's so valuable. Yeah.
Sometimes I have a podcast idea and it's because I know I can say really smart things about it, so I want to use that topic. But sometimes it's like, I just need to hear what other people think about this topic. And this was definitely one of those where I just wanted to sort of have a partner in fleshing out an idea. Me? Who?
You.
Oh, yeah. when I bring myself down from my lofty position on top of the nerd mountain.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you, Richard. This was great. I really mean it. And thanks everybody for listening. And I'm sure we'll be back with more of this kind of stuff. Goodbye.
Bye.